Chrysler's turning 100. 100 years of people-first innovations, from inventing the first plug-in hybrid minivan with stow-and-go seating to reimagining what's next with the Halcyon concept. Chrysler has always put people at the center. Here's to the last century of innovation and the next century to come.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Friday, June 6th, 2025. I'm Jamie Butters, Executive Editor of Automotive News in Detroit.
And I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, Trump and Musk go from joyride to road rage. The U.S. dumps Biden-era fuel economy rules, and we'll find out how much Stellantis plans to pay its new CEO. Plus, TransUnion's Satyen Merchant joins the show to talk about the latest impacts of tariffs on auto finance.
The average amount financed might be a little bit higher because if there is less cash on the hood, fewer incentives, then a consumer may end up having to pay more for that new vehicle.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry.
You may have heard there's been a bit of a dust-up between the CEO of the world's most valuable automaker and the President of the United States. President Donald Trump is threatening subsidies and contracts for all of Tesla CEO Elon Musk's companies amid a very public falling out. On each of their respective social media sites, Trump and Musk have been airing out grievances and personal attacks. On Truth Social, the president said he was disappointed by Musk's public opposition to the sweeping tax cut and spending bill that is at the heart of Trump's agenda. Trump went on to say, quote, "The easiest way to save money in our budget, billions and billions of dollars, is to terminate Elon's governmental subsidies and contracts. I was always surprised that Biden didn't do it." Tesla saw a $152 billion sell-off amid the feud, but recouped some losses Friday. That's after Musk had signaled on X he was open to easing tensions with the president. A White House official said that Trump and Musk are going to talk to each other today, but Trump told CNN, quote, "I'm not even thinking about Elon. He's got a problem. The poor guy's got a problem."
The U.S. Transportation Department has declared that fuel economy rules issued under then-President Joe Biden exceeded the government's legal authority by including electric vehicles in setting the rules. The department made the declaration as it published a final rule titled Resetting the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Program. Removing EVs from the calculations for credits and the regulatory mandates will likely result in lower overall fuel economy requirements. A future separate rule from the Trump administration will revise the specific fuel economy requirements. Senate Republicans have proposed eliminating fines for automakers who fail to meet corporate average fuel economy rules as part of a wide-ranging tax bill. It would be a boost to Detroit automakers selling gasoline-powered vehicles.
Stellantis' newly appointed CEO stands to earn as much as $10.2 million this year. That's according to a filing from the automaker. Antonio Filosa will earn a base salary of $1.8 million. That comes along with short-term and long-term incentives, a cash payment of $1.2 million, and tax equalization benefits to offset taxation in other countries. Stellantis paid Filosa's predecessor, Carlos Tavares, $23.9 million in 2024 and about $40 million in 2023. Tavares will receive about $40 million total following his resignation, including deferred compensation. Filosa's appointment and compensation are expected to be officially confirmed at an extraordinary general meeting on July 18th, although he is to start in his new role on June 23rd.
And Pinewood Technologies Group will buy out Lithia Motors' 51% stake of the company's joint North American venture for $76.5 million in stock. Lithia sold its stake in the JV for a bigger stake, 32% of the parent company. It's a move that could hasten adoption of Pinewood AI's dealership management system software among other U.S. stores. The deal was accompanied by a 5-year contract to bring the Pinewood Automotive Intelligence platform to Lithia's entire U.S. and Canadian dealership footprint. The agreement still needs approval from Pinewood AI shareholders. And those are today's headlines. Jamie, have you read some good tweets lately?
A lot going on.
Thanos versus Dr. Doom. So President Trump and Elon Musk have been going at each other after President Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending bill. Where do you think the relationship goes from here, and how will this affect the auto industry?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea where it's going to go. I mean, it certainly would be in their best interest to de-escalate some of the harsh language, but some of it's been pretty personal, and it might be hard to put those things behind them. For the industry, there's a lot of policy changes going on, especially, the possible elimination of EV tax credits for consumers. And then there's the other, efficiency credits that automakers sell among themselves. That could be a huge blow to Elon Musk. To me, though, the the really fascinating part here is, Elon Musk is so closely identified with his brand, and he alienated so many likely EV buyers, mostly Democrats and centrists, who are interested in EVs. A lot of them really turned off of Tesla because of Musk's active support of Trump as a candidate and his work at Doge. But at the same time, like, there was a chance he was maybe going to, ingratiate himself with Republican voters, Republican consumers, and maybe crack a whole new market open. Now fighting with Trump, it seems like that door is going to be closed off to him. So, gosh, it'll be really interesting to see, how Tesla's brand holds up after he's kind of alienated the left and the right.
And at the same time, Jamie, like, didn't we all kind of see this from the beginning? Since, I mean, Trump was never an EV guy, right? And Elon being the EV guy, I took it as, okay, well, maybe Elon's dealing with Trump because, the bigger picture for Tesla was, the robo-taxi business.
Yeah, the robo-taxi business. Elon Musk has long talked about wanting to go to Mars. Having NASA to work with on that would be really important for him. He's got a lot of big companies with a lot of contracts and a lot of relationships with the government. They're regulated by a lot of different parts of the government. So definitely some challenges there. I mean, yeah, it always seemed like these guys were both, big personalities, and that there wouldn't be room for both of them to stay in the same room for too long. We certainly saw some of that. As far as the EV part goes, right? As a candidate, Donald Trump was pretty explicit that this was just sort of transactional. He said he never really liked EVs, but Elon liked him, and Elon likes EVs, so now he had to like EVs. But I guess that time has passed along with their friendship. Omari Gardner, our director of content and commentary, joined me on Weekend Drive. We talked about all things Trump. It's been a really busy week for Trump within the auto industry. So we'll break all that down tomorrow on Weekend Drive.
Gotcha. Coming up, Satya Merchant of TransUnion talks about the latest impacts of tariffs on auto retail finance. That's next on Daily Drive.
The 2025 Automotive Golf Classic is coming up soon, raising funds for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Southeastern Michigan. Players will tee off Monday, June 16th at St. John's Resort in Plymouth, Michigan.
Attendees will get exclusive access to the third annual Automotive News Supplier Panel discussion just prior to tee time at 9 a.m. This year's remarks will feature Paul Thomas, president of Bosch North America, along with Colin Shaw, president of MEMA Original Equipment Suppliers. The executive guests will discuss challenges for suppliers stemming from the current trade landscape, new U.S. tariffs, and other critical issues facing the supply chain.
For more information about this event, reach out to Tiffany Sula at the Boys and Girls Clubs at tsula@bgcsm.org or to Philip Nussel, AGC Executive Chairman at pnussel@crane.com.
Chrysler's turning 100. That's a whole century of shaping the way America drives and leading with innovation. Did you know Chrysler introduced the first ignition key? What about the first automatic transmission, the first Hemi V8 engine, the first windshield wipers, and the first ever minivan? And they never stopped innovating, even today. The Chrysler Pacifica is the first and only plug-in hybrid minivan, the first with the convenience of stow-and-go seating, and it's packed with the most high-tech safety features in its segment. But for Chrysler, it's about more than just innovating. It's about innovating for people, for memories, road trips with your friends, school drop-offs in the rain, family reunions, weekend soccer tournaments, first dates, first drives, and everything in between. Chrysler's been there for all of it, leading the way with game-changing ideas. And they've introduced the Halcyon concept, driving the brand's future innovation, focusing on building a sleek, smart, sustainable vehicle design for the next generation of driver. So here's to Chrysler, 100 years of innovation, memories, and everything in between.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Jamie Butters with Kellen Walker. In auto finance, there have been positive signs of recovery and momentum across all credit tiers, helped along by incentives. Satyan Merchant is Senior Vice President at TransUnion. He spoke with Automotive News Senior Editor Dan Shine about how continued tariffs threaten to thwart this momentum and what other challenges exist in the automotive finance sector.
Satyan, great to have you back again on the F&I Friday edition of Daily Drive.
It's always good to chat with you, Dan. Thanks for having me again.
So I wanted to first talk a little bit, have you kind of give the highlights, the overview of TransUnion's Q1 Credit Industry Insights Report, which kind of looks at all sorts of things from mortgages to credit cards to personal loans, the auto finance sector. Overall, what have you guys kind of seen going on in kind of in this credit industry?
Sure. So, this time around when we issued our Industry Insights Report, our Credit Industry Insights Report, we wanted to go a little bit deeper in some of the data that we've been reporting over time, specifically around consumer debt. So one of the things that we looked at was what we always look at is the total amount of consumer debt and balances that folks are carrying in the United States. And the story there is a continued story of increases across all risk tiers. For instance, the nominal dollar change from 2020 to 2025 has increased. Some of the numbers are large. For instance, in super prime consumers, 46.5% increase in adjusted balances, right? So what we looked at, that was the insight, is what these numbers are from an inflation adjusted number. And what I mean by that is we looked at these dollar changes of debt, again, 11.5% for near prime, 7.5% for prime, et cetera, 26% for subprime. But then we applied the growth of inflation over that same 5-year period. And what we found was that the real dollar change from the inflation adjusted amount was actually negative for most consumers. It was still around 18% for super prime consumers, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But for prime plus, prime, near prime, there were actually negative growth in terms of debt balances from an inflation-adjusted point of view. Subprime was up just slightly, almost 2%. So what is that telling us, Dan? It's telling us that consumers have been taking on more debt in terms of dollars. That's why, the headline number is over 18 trillion in Q1 of 2025 from 14 trillion in 2020. However, what has happened also is some amount of wage growth for consumers. And so when you factor that in, consumers are roughly taking on the same amount of debt versus their income and their wages as they were previously 5 years ago. And in some cases, they're taking on less. Again, for that prime consumer, it's actually negative 13.5% growth. So here, what we're seeing is consumers continue to build balances. In the super prime I mentioned earlier, a large part of that are things like mortgages. Look, consumers since 2020 who have a mortgage or who had one existing, oftentimes those are super prime consumers. Those consumers were refinancing and maybe doing a cash out refi, so taking out a larger debt load. They were possibly buying additional homes, vacation homes. So there's a reason why the super prime consumer might be taking on more debt. But again, they're super prime. They tend to perform well on those loans. One other part of this, as we kind of link it to the automotive finance side, is that consumers, despite all the ups and downs in the industry over the last 5 years, the auto market, the auto industry, and the auto lending market has continued to chug along. And as you and I both know, vehicle prices have gone up, the amount financed has gone up. So debt and balances for auto loans has continued to grow over the last few years as well.
And so overall for auto finance, you see some positive signs of recovery across kind of all tiers?
Sure. Yeah, actually, that's one of the key takeaways from when we look deeper into the auto finance segment. It's for the first time in several quarters, we've seen auto loan originations positive on a year over year basis in every risk tier, as you mentioned, Dan. And so, we always keep an eye on the year over year comparison of originations. The story had been all risk tiers except for super prime were shrinking over the last few quarters, as recent as last quarter when we issued this report. But now we finally saw a positive uptick. Now, some were modest. In some risk tiers, it was just over 0% year over year growth. Super prime continues to lead at nearly 16% year over year growth. And so, one of the main reasons we believe in this growth in auto finance and auto lending has been finally some relief from the interest rate picture. Again, this is Q4 2024 data we're talking about. So between Q4 2023 and 2024, there actually has been some reduction in interest rates. There might be some more to go, but it was some relief that consumers were feeling as interest rates came down. And we finally had some stability from an inventory perspective, particularly on the new vehicle side. So after, again, 3-4 years of tumultuous swings in the market, Q4 of 2024 showed that there was finally some growth across all risk tiers based on stability as well as lower interest rates.
And what kind of role does things such as incentives, such as people maybe running to buy a vehicle before tariffs might set in? What kind of factors do you think that those played in what you're seeing?
So I think there's two sides of that coin. On the one hand, we don't have the full Q1 data yet or Q2 data yet, but I suspect when we issue our next report, what we'll find in the first quarter is that there's some amount of pull forward demand for those vehicles ahead of the announcements of tariffs. Now, as you and I know, the tariffs are still kind of up in the air, and it's not exactly sure which vehicles, which manufacturers, et cetera, are going to be affected by tariffs. But if we think back to March of this year in the first quarter, that's when a lot of activity that we saw with lenders at the dealership, where the industry did have a slight uptick. So I expect that we'll see a pull forward or bump up in originations. Now, the flip side of that, and again, this is having spoken with those in the industry more recently, if there are vehicles and manufacturers that are going to be subject to tariffs, one of the levers that we know in this industry, that we've seen this story in the past, that manufacturers and dealers use to mitigate increasing costs, is that lever of incentives. Whether those incentives show up in subvented loans from a captive or simply cash on the hood, it's possible, and we'll see when the data comes out, that those incentives might get pulled back as a means to pass on increased costs to consumers. And if that's the case, we may see two things in the data. One is a drop in origination activity, because again, things are getting more expensive. And then two, the average amount financed might be a little bit higher, because if there is less cash on the hood, fewer incentives, then a consumer may end up having to pay more for that new vehicle.
One final thing. You talked about this kind of this debt load that people are carrying. How does that play into potential delinquencies, if delinquencies might be on the rise because of just people having more bills to pay?
Great question, Dan. So just framing where we stand with delinquencies in the auto industry right now, and in our report, again, this was Q1 data, or is Q1 data. The consumer level delinquency rate, that 60 days past due, ticked up slightly year over year. We're talking 1.5% up to 1.56%. I think that's very modest, and I would call that flat, really. So again, a good sign that consumers, after a few years of more material increase in delinquency rate, it seems to be flattening out. The consumers carrying higher amounts of debt is probably reflective in how the delinquency rate has increased over time. But what we looked at that I think might be even more effectual for an auto loan borrower is not so much other balances and debt on, say, a credit card or a mortgage, but actually other costs of owning a vehicle. We believe that's a bit more of a driver of any increased delinquency. And so one thing we did is we indexed the certain vehicle ownership costs, for instance, maintenance, fuel, and insurance. These are, again, things that don't exist on the credit file, but these are known costs. We indexed the increase of those costs against things like wage increases and just CPI. And what we found is that all three of them were above CPI and wage increases. So especially maintenance and insurance, the cost of those indexed back to 2025 is significantly higher, almost 50% higher than 2025, whereas CPI and wages are more in the 20 to 30% range. So we believe that just the stress that a consumer is facing when they go to own a vehicle, whether it's a new or used vehicle, is becoming more and more pronounced when it comes to insurance, when it comes to other maintenance expenses. And then fuel, although very recently fuel prices have come down a little bit, but this is after a couple of years of higher oil and higher fuel prices. So these are all areas that have been hurting consumers. I'll just add, Dan, another piece that we looked into is the refinance opportunity that consumers have in front of them. And even though interest rates haven't fallen dramatically, we had just 2 rate cuts in the last several months, we found that there are still several consumers out there who may have the opportunity to refinance their auto loan. Typically, it helps them with a lower monthly payment. And we found that borrowers who have refinanced their auto loan tend to perform better, meaning go delinquent less often than consumers who have not refinanced their auto loan. So there are mitigation steps that I think lenders are offering and that consumers might have if they're feeling the stress on a lot of expenses.
Good stuff. Satyan, always great to have you on and appreciate your insights into the auto finance sector. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dan. Talk soon.
Satyan Merchant is Senior Vice President at TransUnion. He spoke with our own Dan Shine. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own John Hutter for his reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Peter Siegel of our sibling publication, Automotive News Europe. You can get the latest news on finance and insurance, government regulations, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
Come back over the weekend for our Weekend Drive edition of the show. Our own Omari Gardner talks about all things Trump as the president's tariffs force automakers to adjust pricing strategies and as he feuds with Tesla CEO Elon Musk.
While this may be entertaining or not so entertaining for some folks, there are serious material things going on with the administration with the potential to kill or reduce emissions mandates, to kill the EV incentive, and to roll back the emissions credits.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.